Hey everybody, welcome back to Tim Travels. As always, it's Terry, your host. Um, I have no idea where Tim is. Haven't heard from him in a couple of weeks, maybe 10 days. As soon as I get an update, I'll I'll give you one where he's traveling. Um, I don't have much to report on the travel side of things today. Back in Ohio, uh, you know, just kind of getting in a cycle. Got a load that's going down to southern Indiana, kind of a little bit west of Cincinnati tomorrow. Probably be a slow day tomorrow as far as travel goes, mileage goes, because I'm running a little bit low on hours. I tend to run a recap. So tomorrow I'll only have maybe like 8 hours to work with. I'm only 2.5 hours from my delivery, but yeah, so I won't be knocking out 500. I won't be knocking out 500 miles tomorrow. So just a follow up. I did a video about lumpers and some other stuff, and so I actually delivered today at the company that I delivered and picked up with yesterday. And in fact, it was like Company A to Company A's facility in Burlington, Company A's facility in Burlington to Ohio. And it's kind of interesting, I said how drivers get treated, how lumpers get treated, although this company doesn't use lumpers. And just a follow up to that, so I go there, and this company won't let you use the bathrooms at their facilities. There's not even a porta potty outside for you to use. And when you go in, there are literally like 8 signs saying you can't go past the point of the window. And if you look down the hall, you can see bathrooms. So I was kind of joking, and I said to the guy, so can I go past this point? And he was like, no. He goes, why are you asking me that? You can't read? I'm like, no, I saw you already had like 8 signs. And he's like, well, I would put more up if I could. He goes, people can't seem to read. It's like, would you come in here without a mask on? And I had a mask on, and I'm like, no. But this guy was not wearing a mask. And the window that he was, for where his office is was wide open. And he's just like breathing all over the place with no mask on. So he wasn't sharp enough to get that. But whatever. It's kind of par for the course. So anyway, what I wanted to talk about today, and you're going to want to stay tuned, because over the next little bit, we're going to be talking about a lot of important financial considerations for both owner operators, lease operators. So both both or all of the above: owner operators, lease operators, company drivers, and how to hedge against risk, how to deal with some tax issues, maybe some tax strategies, what vehicles to use. I'm not going to recommend, you should buy stock in ABC Corp, but I am going to cover a lot of stuff that you may not have heard of. As I mentioned, I think yesterday, I was a financial advisor, had several securities licenses. In fact, I've even had a general securities principal license before, Series 24. So we'll talk about a lot of stuff involving post-work planning, but also contingency planning. So you'll want to stay tuned for that, and I'll have I'll maybe give you a little taste here at the end. We'll see how we're doing on time. So today, though, I want to talk about something that a lot of people kind of talk about, but not exactly. So there are a lot of trucking channels that talk about, well, what do you do if your company fires you on the road? You know, what do you do if you're just sick of your company and you want to quit and you're on the road? You know, and then there's people have different opinions about whether or not you can just leave a truck somewhere, what your obligations are, all that stuff. And there's some legal issues there, and I'm not really going to address those today. But, you know, as I've pointed out before, we're all, unless you're in a union, we're all at-will employees. But that also makes our employer an at-will employer, meaning we can quit at any time for any reason and without notice, and they can let us go at any time for any reason and without notice. The only time I would push back against a company letting me go is if they said I did something wrong. In other words, that they're firing me for cause, rather than just saying, oh, we're cutting drivers or whatever. And the reason you want to push back against being fired for cause is because people are going to ask about it. Have you ever been fired for cause? So, you know, that's kind of a big deal. But what I want to talk about today is when you decide you need to leave, but not in the cases that I've talked about before, where it's like, what are you looking for in a new company? But more like, how do you flee the company you're with? And what I mean by flee is where you didn't really plan to leave, but it becomes very obvious very quickly that you need to leave. And, you know, these are important things to think about, because if you work for a decent sized company, let's say you work for a company that has 300-400 drivers, and the company is all of a sudden gonna let everybody go. You know, they're required under certain laws to file what are called WARN Act notices. That's when you're going to get rid of more than like 50 employees at a time. I think it's over 50, but don't quote me on that. But regardless of whether they file a WARN Act notice, I mean, you know, like, what are you going to do about it? The government could take action against them, but you wouldn't have any claims, any cause of action. But what are some signs that you should bug out? You should just pack it up and book. You know, even if you got to be without work for a few days. And really, if you're a good driver, that's all it will be. Most decent sized companies have orientations at least once a week, but sometimes twice a week. So you could leave a company on Friday and be back to work on Wednesday. I mean, that is not unheard of, and it's not an impossibility. You know, that's not even that heavy of a lift. So here are some reasons you might want to flee your company and some signs to look for. So just for starters, there's two kinds of companies, private and public. There are several trucking companies. Most of the time, they're big companies that are public companies. Schneider's public, J.B. Hunt's public, Knight Swift, their holding company is public, which also would include Abilene and Bar None. Heartland Express is public, and there are a number of other companies that are public. So how can you find out information about public companies? Well, that's actually pretty easy, because they are public. Public means that they want to avail themselves of the public capital markets, meaning they want to get money from the public. They want the public to buy their stocks. So think companies that are listed on the New York Stock Exchange, the American Stock Exchange, NASDAQ, etc. All of those companies that avail themselves of the public markets have a bunch of regulatory requirements. They have to file annual and quarterly reports. Those reports are filed with the Securities and Exchange Commission. Those reports are, you know, annual and quarterly. They're 10Ks and 10Qs. Those are the kind of the names of the reports. But there's also a report called an 8K. And I think I've mentioned this before, but you can find these on a website called Edgar, EDGAR, and that's the SEC's website that has every corporate filing. So an 8K has to be filed when there's some event that needs to be in public knowledge. So for example, if it's material, and that's kind of a legal term of art, but if it would be important to the average investor, that's kind of the materiality standard. They have to file an 8K. So here's an example. If Knight Swift decides that they're in talks to buy some trucking company that has 500 drivers, 500 trucks. Once that deal is kind of inked, they have to, even if the other company is privately held, they would probably have to file an 8K and outline the transaction. If there are insider sales of stock, so for example, there's a guy that, actually he's a nice guy, I've met him before, David Jackson. He's the CEO of Knight Swift Holdings. If Dave Jackson decides, so I'm assuming Dave owns a bunch of Knight Swift stock. If he's selling like 500,000 shares of that, that's what's called an insider sale. That has to be documented on an 8K that goes to the Securities and Exchange Commission. So you can find out, and there are other places to get this information, other websites and stuff that'll have that listed, but insider sales are sometimes indicative of people selling before bad news comes out about the company. Now, it's illegal to trade on material, non-public information. So that would constitute insider trading. But if it's something that they just, like the long range forecast is, we don't think the trucking industry is going to grow, then maybe a guy that has a lot of stock would be like, this stock's going to take a beating. I'd like to go move some of my position to cash. They're going to sell. Doesn't mean your job's in jeopardy, but it's just an indicator of the health of the company, or what somebody that's a very senior manager thinks is the health of the company. When they announce a big hit to their earnings, like they take a huge charge off for something like some huge liability, that's a warning sign. Cutting their dividend. Knight Swift, I know for a fact, has a dividend. If they cut their dividend, that is normally seen by investors as a negative, a company cutting their dividend. If they're heavily shorted, and let me just say this, that there's been a lot in the news about shorting with GameStop and hedge funds that were shorting them, but if the market's really bearish, meaning they have a negative sentiment about a stock, the market could be wrong, or the stock could just be overpriced. Doesn't mean the company's in bad shape. It's just maybe they feel the stock is overpriced. If a company, though, feels like their stock is overpriced, they will typically use their own funds to buy their own stock from the market. Also, excuse me, mass resignations of like senior people. In a company the size of Knight or Swift, a couple dozen mid-level managers leaving doesn't really mean that much. They might have just been poached by another carrier, and they're just leaving for more money, and that's just how it goes. But if you start seeing like board members resigning, like people heading for the for the exits, people getting lawyers for some reason, that's a bad sign. Okay. Also, read up on your own company. Learn what your own company looks like to outsiders. What's the mergers and acquisitions outlook? I mean, I think people at Millis were kind of taken aback when Millis was bought out by Heartland Express. Keep your eye on stuff like that. Now, for private companies, they don't have to disclose nearly as much information as a public company does. But, once they announce stuff, and they typically do announce things they think are positive, doesn't necessarily mean it's positive for the employees. It's what they think is positive. Here's one of the things to look out for. If your company is either taken over, acquired, this is the term people use, or is the acquirer, if they're publicly traded and they're being acquired, their stock price is going to go up. If they're the acquirer, right, their stock price is typically going to go down. But for private companies, no matter whether you're public or private, the company that's being taken over is almost always the one where people are going to experience much more significant change. And if positions are eliminated, it's almost always at the company that was acquired. And whatever the culture is of the bigger company, the company that's doing the takeover, that's what your culture is going to end up like. Guaranteed. Any industry, guaranteed. No company is going to buy out another company and then go, oh yeah, let's just do things the way you were doing them. That's not how this works. It's not it's not an equal transaction no matter what anybody says. Okay? I've looked at tons of mergers over the years, just as a casual observer. Culture is a big thing, and it's not going to be, if your company was acquired, your culture is going away. It's no different than if one country took over another. That's just how it is. Okay, so those are like kind of big, kind of macro ideas. But here's some other stuff that you can look for on a daily basis without doing a whole lot of research. If you're on the road and your truck needs repairs, and your company's like, oh, well, can you just finish this load, and then we'll get you headed towards one of our terminals, but it's something that would cause you a DOT failure, a roadside inspection failure. That's a warning sign. Why won't your company spend money on the road to keep their trucks up? If your fuel card gets declined, it's your fuel card. If you can't get fuel for your truck, that's a huge warning sign. And I saw it just the other day at a truck stop where apparently the guy thought, the driver that is, he thought that, and it may have happened, that his company put money for him to get fuel on a card that I think was like a payroll card, like maybe a Visa debit or something, like issued through a payroll company. Okay, first of all, that's wrong to do that, because then it assumes they know how much fuel you're going to need. That's the first warning sign. But the second warning sign is he couldn't even use that card to buy fuel, because that's not a system that the truck stops have set up. Okay, EFS, ComData, if you don't have money or access to things you need on the road, that's a warning sign, because what else would they be spending money on? Keeping you running, it should be job one. If your pay is late, if you have been getting paid on X day of the week, let's say Thursday or whatever, and then all of a sudden they're like, well, hey, from now on we're going to close out pay on the same day, but we're not going to pay you to the following Tuesday. That's a warning sign, because you know, unless they're changing payroll providers or something like that, that's a good explanation. It's like, why are they moving that? Except they're gaining a few extra days. They're buying time. What are they buying time for? Or if they say, oh, we're going from weekly pay to bi-weekly pay, that's a warning sign. Because in the industry, the standard is weekly. Reneging on commitments. So they say, yeah, we'll give you, you're due for a pay increase on X date. And then you don't get it. And they're like, oh yeah, we're just reviewing pay increases across the board. So you're in the hopper. We just got to get through the paperwork. We got a new HR director or some excuse like that. It's bad news. It's bad news. And it's just not the way to treat people. Staff movement. So this is staff movement, like all of a sudden your company had 10 DMs, let's say, and they were each handling 20 drivers. And all of a sudden half of them are gone within like a week. That's a warning sign. They know something that you don't know and that the other DMs aren't telling you. Because what happened was, to keep the other DMs, they gave them pay increases. But really, those other DMs, if they're smart, they're going to be looking for a place to go too. They just got to, hold on and they got to get a job lined up. For owner-operators, if they're paying you slowly or there are cancellations and they're not compensating you for it, that's a problem. There shouldn't be a lot of load cancellations if they're on top of things. And if there are load cancellations coming from a specific shipper, they ought to be firing that customer. Like Crete fired Amazon for that. Okay, so there's nobody too big to get fired if they're not a reliable customer. So if you're an owner-operator and you have you think you should have settlement, let's say maybe you only have settlements every 2 weeks or every month, and all of a sudden it's like, it's getting pushed back or you're not getting paid in a timely manner, that's a problem, because time is money. And so if they're slow paying you, they're slow paying other people, and you might as well cut your losses. Anyway, this is not a completely exhaustive list of red flags, but it should give you some ideas of things to look for. Because sometimes you just want to get out of Dodge. If you're a solid performer, you will find another job quickly. But you don't want to be stranded out in the middle of, Dodge City, Kansas, maybe. You want to make sure your check clears. So sometimes, if the writing's on the wall and other guys are like, oh, well, they'll get it fixed. If it's already known to the rank and file employees that there's some big problem, it's not going to be fixed, because they've been trying to fix it. They weren't surprised by it. They might say they were, but they weren't. And this is just my experience talking. This is just my experience advising companies and being around businesses, large and small, for a long time. These are warning signs that you got to look for. So anyway, I hope you found this useful. Please subscribe, like, comment. If you got any questions, hit us up. I'll leave our email address in the what do you call that section? I don't know. You know where to find it though. All right. So, hey, everybody have a good day. Again, stay tuned. Tell all your friends. There's going to be a lot more good information coming up. Solid stuff. Not just like, oh, I had a flat tire. Here's what you do for a flat tire. This is going to be information that's going to be valuable to you, either for yourself or for somebody that you know. So I hope you'll share and like and subscribe. So take care and catch you next time.